Welcome to the Blitz Growth Podcast. Listen in to learn how founders, entrepreneurs, and creators build and scale their businesses online. Let's get started.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Blitz Growth, where we dive deep into entrepreneur and creators' stories from the bottom to the top. And today we're going to be going over how we started Vyper, our first SaaS company, and what it was like starting from nothing and building that up, the steps we took, how we found each other as co-founders, the pros and cons of co-founders. We're also going to try and help you out in understanding what the first steps are if you are creating your first SaaS, in learning to code, or what you kind of need to look for in finding someone who can help you building that SaaS app. So I'm here today with Kevin. We're going to kind of go back and forth with a few questions and inform you about our road to starting and building Vyper. So the Vyper story, pretty much. So how are you doing, Kevin?
Good, man. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. And today I think we're going to go into a little bit of the beginning of when you sort of first started Vyper, because this was an app that you had started developing before I was even in the picture.
Yep.
So maybe let's start from the very beginning on, for a lot of people out there wondering how to actually get started or even come up with an idea of getting started for a SaaS app, whether it's a software as a service, whether it's maybe an idea for a course, maybe it's just something that you need to create in order to take the first steps to, generating revenue from something online, whether it be, course, asset, download, or SaaS. So how did you get started?
Yeah. Okay, so to get into that story, I think there needs to be a little bit of backstory. Basically, right out of college, so this was like right around, I think, 21, I had started my first sort of business that was making money online pretty successfulugly. And that was a e-commerce store that was selling digital assets for photographers. So that would be like courses, plugins, things of that nature. And so that was my first foray into business, and that did fairly well. And the way I came up with that was basically, I actually just resold other people's things, so their assets. So it was like, I was kind of like the middleman, and I helped, grow their audience base. So that was like an easy way to get started. And I think what happened
with that idea,
actually, so I had a co-founder, and then we just knew that we were both photographers. And then, so we had knowledge in the space. And then secondly, we didn't have our own product, so we wanted to sell other people's products. So it was just easier to do that instead of doing our own or developing our own thing. And later on with that brand though, I actually like wrote my own book and like stuff like that. And I sold that as part of it too. So I built up an email list, and then I sold a digital book. So, and that was like 100% of the profits, right? So,
yeah. So that's an idea actually, just to point out to people, like if you can't build something or create something yourself, you can leverage other people's products and be that middleman, like Kevin was saying. So I think that's a really good stepping stone if you can't fully commit to building your own product or service. How can you get involved, learn the industry, learn how everything works, and then once you've got that experience, go and create something of your own?
Yeah, so like I think like a good example of doing this is AppSumo, right? So AppSumo, they at the beginning they didn't have their own products, they sold other people's products, they took a cut, and then later on, once they built an email list, they then started selling their own products. So once you build that audience. So basically, the business model there was leveraging other people's products to build your audience, and then leveraging that audience to sell your own products. Mm-hmm. Easier said than done, but it's definitely a good business model for someone who's just starting out, right? So, and this was also back in the day when it was a little bit easier to compete online, right? So I ended up selling that business to a firm overseas, and then got money in the bank, and then I started doing a bunch of other businesses. A lot of them were in the media space, and the thing that I take from this era was I got a little too overconfident from that previous business. I thought it was like going to be super easy to like do the next thing, right? Because I was like, oh yeah, this is internet business is easy. Like I can just, put up some websites or whatever. And I just didn't really have, like, with these other businesses, like I was able to get traffic, but I wasn't able to get a good sort of, these other businesses were in the media space, right? As I was saying, I was able to get the traffic, but I wasn't able to sell enough advertising or sell my own products enough to make that profitable in the long term, right? And then also I had a big expense sheet. So I was hiring writers and stuff like that to write the content. And like we had, media people and stuff like that doing stuff as well, right? So so after I sold the first business, which was called PhotoWhoe, spent 2 years trying out other stuff and ended up, not wasting, but like using up that money in those 2 years I got from the acquisition. And so that led me to like where I was right before I started Vypers, right? So I noticed that these media businesses weren't working. I knew how to get the traffic, but I didn't have a solid enough product to sell. And so that's what I realized was kind of the missing ingredient there, right? So that's when I started looking at, okay, what can I really sell? Because I think I think selling something is the easiest way to make money. And also selling something digital, I realized, was also another super easy way to be profitable, because a digital product has a much higher margin, right? Mm-hmm. And now I think looking back on it, I think software as a service is probably one of the hardest digital products you can make, though. Would you? Right? So I really went down sort of the deep end there. Like, I think if obviously I'm cool with the result now, but at the time, like, if you really wanted to do something easier, I would have done probably just like more like courses or books or something, because I already had sort of a niche within the photography industry, so I could have just leveraged that and started like selling more stuff like that if I just needed money, right, to get something going. Because doing a SaaS is definitely a long process. It's a very long process. But at the time I was very optimistic. I also wanted to learn how to code, and so that was a big thing too. So I had already a little bit of knowledge on coding. So prior to that, I knew CSS, I knew HTML. I knew a little bit of PHP, but not that much. So from that, I just leveraged that knowledge into starting to learn how to code. And that's when I started coding the first version of Vyper, which is the product that we've built up now.
Yeah. And so I think there's a few things to take away just before you keep moving on. I want to point out a few things here that I think worked really well, and a few things to highlight for people listening is, one of the really important things to do when you're starting out is to remain lean. So, looking at that cash flow, looking at money in and money out, and being as lean as possible when you get started. This is also going to tie into when we start talking about co-founders and finding co-founders with complementary skill sets, so that you can delay having to hire someone and being able to keep that, that expense list really low. The other thing is that you pointed out really well is, creating courses and digital downloads and that sort of thing. 100% agree, the digital path is really good. And if you do have a skill set, like Kevin was saying, he's really good in the photography space, and that's what he studied, and that's what he had a lot of knowledge in. So you can make courses a lot easier on a subject that you're knowledgeable in. And it gets even easier if you have a lot of authority in that space as well. So if you are thinking about creating a course or creating some sort of digital asset or download for a specific niche, make sure that you have the knowledge and, some sort of experience and expertise to create that, because that's going to make it a lot easier to sell at the end of the day. Because when you have a good product, it's much easier to sell something rather than if you create a mediocre product. So, those are a few takeaways that I just drew out of that story that might help you guys if you're thinking about either starting a SaaS company or starting a course or digital download based off education and knowledge.
Yeah, and then for me specifically, by the time I started Vyper, there wasn't, I didn't even have money in the bank, right? So your choices are either do something that doesn't cost money or, maybe go fundraise. But the fundraising route is a very difficult route, especially if you haven't been down that path before. And you don't have connections, you don't have rich parents that can just give you the money. You really want to, in my opinion, you really want to do something where, or you want to fundraise for something where you have the expertise and you already have sort of the, a proof of concept going, And so at the time I didn't have any of that. So I just built out Vyper using my own skills. Basically, I had to learn how to code to build the MVP version of Vyper, right? And that was to me, that was actually a pretty fun process. I actually enjoy coding, so it wasn't hard to do that. And then so this was in 2016, January of 2016. I started coding up Vyper. And then I had very little expectations of it, to be honest. I didn't think of it as hey, I have to build this to become profitable. I just thought of it as hey, I'll just learn how to code with this project, So I didn't validate the product at all, really. I just saw what was an easy product for me to build, and I saw a product that was useful, and that there's other competitors already in the market. So I knew some people wanted this kind of product, and then I just built it.
Yeah, I think the other thing there is on raising money and taking funding, you raise a really good point about when you should do that. And I agree with you. I think having some sort of traction, having an MVP, having some sort of growth will help when you go to raise money because you can negotiate better terms. Not many people are going to kind of invest and fund your idea. They want to make a financial decision that has a higher success rate than just an idea, because I think everybody has ideas. A lot of people have ideas, but very few people can execute on them. And once you start that execution and start showing growth, that's when I think you should, if you are going to raise money, go down that path. We can talk about why we didn't raise money actually, because I think that is a lifestyle choice, whether you decide to raise or not for your startup or company, because a lot of things change once you take money from investors. What do you think?
Yeah. So I'll lay out why I think we did the bootstrap thing, and you can tell me how you feel about what I just said. Okay. So first of all, when you go to fundraise, right? A lot of times when you do a fundraise, you really want to have, you need the connections, to be honest. If you don't have any connections, you have no one in, you've never fundraised before. You're not in the Bay Area where there's a lot of, random connections you can make. Then it's not an easy process to go about fundraising. And, that can highly detract from the process of just building out your product, right? And then the second thing is, by the time we were at a point where we could have fundraised, we realized that we didn't need to, because we were already making money. Why would we don't need to dilute ourselves when we already have a business that is workable without fundraising, right? What do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I would just say, think about the company that you want to create. And, I think there's a clear divide between companies who are looking to get profitable and companies who are looking to scale in terms of volume. If you're looking to scale in terms of volume and you need mass adoption and you're not focusing on profitability, so that's the guys like these social networks or these guys like, Uber and Lyft and all that sort of stuff. When they started, they just needed mass adoption. And, they would definitely have to go down that funding route because there's obviously so much involved in that. Whereas if you're a smaller SaaS or a smaller company or something like that, then, bootstrapping for as long as you can is much better because you become profitable, you pay yourself, You don't have to dilute, as you said. You don't end up having a boss. As soon as you take on funding, a lot of the times you're going to have to answer to those people, and they're going to have a say in the decisions that you're going to have to make about your company. So I think, for us, we're in the process of building out multiple apps. If we had taken funding, it would be really hard to start working on other projects while we were still, running Vyper. So that's another thing, if it's your first app, think about if, that's your one and only app, because once you take that funding, you're going to be held responsible for giving those returns back to those investors. And they're not going to be too confident if you only spend 50% of your time on the company that they've invested in. That's another thing I think that we learned. And luckily, we didn't go down the path of raising, because, who knows if we would have even done, Hyax, which is our second SaaS app, which is much bigger and much more robust. And in our opinion, obviously a much better product. But if we had taken the funding, we might have been stuck with doing Vyper and either, killing it or selling it or something like that. And it wouldn't be that kind of stability cash flow that's helped us build Hyax.
Right. And then also, I think with Vyper too, it's a more of a niche app as well. So it's not as, it has a target audience, but that audience isn't necessarily a huge audience. So with that in mind, when you raise funding, you really need to be going for these $1 billion type apps, in my opinion. Because your idea needs to be big enough for investors to be interested in your product. Mm-hmm. And now, obviously, that's a little bit changed now because there are funds out there that work on these smaller apps, but that's still a model that's still unproven at this point. The most proven model is
Tiny Seed.
Yeah. Tiny Seed, Indie.vc, there's models like that. But if you're trying to raise, venture funds, you really want to be looking, your app really needs to be sort of an app that's going to be in the $100 million to $1 billion range. At least aiming for that kind of app. And then for us, we didn't necessarily see that potential with Vyper. We just saw it as lifestyle business, a good lifestyle business that can fund our next thing, which is what we think is going to be sort of the bigger app. Yeah. Right. So, and that's Hyax. Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of a good lead up into, your backstory. And then you said kind of Vyper was your kind of project to learn how to code. So what are kind of the steps that you took to get going and start coding? Because I know a lot of people out there are like, okay, I want to learn to code. It's such a valuable skill set. The average wage is really high. People can get jobs as coders. You can work remotely. There's so many upsides to learning how to code, but I know there's a lot of pushback because people are like, it's too hard to do. I don't have enough time. I'm not in the right location.
Yeah.
I'm too old for this. I can't learn a new skill set like that. So what would you say to all of those rejections and how you overcame those to actually go and do it?
Yeah, I think the problem is that if you're the type of person who thinks that you can't do it, then most likely you probably can't, because it's just one of those things where you have to have an interest in doing it to really do it. It's kind of like, if you don't have any interest in becoming an actor or something, a profession that's very difficult, then it's there's no way you're going to force yourself to become that, or no one can force you to become an actor. You have to really enjoy the craft, in my opinion. So, I think it doesn't come down to making people learn how to code. I think it just comes down to what are your actual interests and trying to pursue those, in my opinion. Right. But let's say you do have that passion. Let's say you do want to learn how to code. Right. And then you do like it. You have to understand that it is a frustrating thing to learn at times, but also very rewarding when you get through it. So you have to, when it is frustrating, there's ways to overcome a lot of that. So number one, there's ways you can get a mentor. Like, so there's apps out there. There's like Code Mentor is one of them, where basically they assign you to somebody that can help you when you run into things that you don't understand. If you don't want to pay for that, there's also like you can just make friends that are developers and have them look at stuff if you run into issues. And then the other thing to really speed up your learning process is doing a boot camp, a coding boot camp. Because I think there's people who can do it self-taught, and that's what I did. But I think the average person really needs that structure to help move them along. And also with coding boot camps, they give you a very sort of rigid structure, and then they have mentors to help teach on the way. So that's super important.
Yeah, I think the accountability really helps with doing those boot camps. Yeah. And kind of, that leads me to my next question for you. There's so many different languages out there that you can learn. And, I know you got started with PHP, and then how did you choose what to start with? Because, some people might be wondering like, hey, I definitely want to learn to code, but I don't know which language to learn, or I don't know which path or person to follow, or what that means in the long-term future of my skill set. Like, if you learn a certain language, does it, limit your opportunities or expand your opportunities?
Right. So this is a difficult question because it just depends on so many factors. Like, one of the factors is whether you're trying to build an app for yourself or whether you're trying to build an app for for a job, right? And then even when you answer that question, you have to ask yourself, are you trying to build like a mobile app, or are you trying to build a web app, or are you trying to build a desktop app or something, So it's one of those things where you need to ask a very specific question to get the answer, right? For me, I decided I was like trying to build a web app for myself, and one that's a language that's easy for me to use, easy for me to be productive in. And that's how I chose my language. That was the considerations for choosing my language, which is PHP. And it's in a framework, the E02 framework. But for someone else, maybe they're trying to, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and so if you were to go back and be in the same position you were when you started, would you still choose PHP in the E02 framework, or would you choose something else? What would be your advice to someone who's at that beginning point and they've currently got that decision to make right now?
Yeah, for me, I would definitely stay with the same framework. There's a case to be made that maybe instead of E02, you would use like this other one called Laravel. But that one, because my goal is just to be as productive as possible. And so I chose the one that I was able to be as productive as possible in, right? Because I tried Laravel and I wasn't as productive in that one. So I just decided, okay, so it's a no-brainer for me to choose E2. For certain people, it just depends. Like, there's always trade-offs with every one of them. I think with Laravel, it has a bigger community, so there's more people to ask questions about. But then the problem is, one of the problems that I ran with it is like it keeps updating. So, and that's the problem, because if you write all your code in one version and then it updates, then you have to rewrite all your code. So there's trade-offs with all of these platforms. Whereas like the E2 one has been in like a stable release for like, a long time. So it's okay. The same code. So it's a lot more stable. I feel like it has long term, it's going to be good. And, it's fast as well. And so those were all the considerations that I had for my platform. And then, a lot of people are going to say that they like the Laravel thing and they are more productive in Laravel. So if that's the case, then you got to choose the one that you're more productive in. So,
okay. All right. That's a good summary of how you got started with coding and what options you would take if you were to redo it. Another question I had here was, what were the main challenges you faced when you got started building Vyper? What was the biggest challenges that you had to overcome? And if you can highlight how you overcame them, that might help a few people as well.
Yeah. So I'll say this, I think that I got lucky specifically because I was ready to kind of go at the whole thing, just by myself. I wasn't, because we became co-founders, I think 6 months into after I was developing stuff. And that was and obviously we can go into the co-founder relationship in a little bit, but I think that was a very fortunate thing that happened, right? Because to go at the thing alone would have been pretty difficult, in my opinion. I've done other apps alone, but usually it's a lot harder. Or sorry, not other apps, other businesses alone, and those all end up failing. So I just realized that, when you have someone who's has the same skin in the game and who's also a hard worker too, that helps to get your thing going. I think most of the challenges really came after we became co-founders, not necessarily before that, in my opinion. Because I think before that, I was only just learning how to code. And so it wasn't really a big challenge, right?
Yeah, so I think you get further down the path, those challenges start to arise that you didn't necessarily think about.
Yeah. The challenges was more in marketing, I think. Right?
Yeah.
I think.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Let's dive into the co-founder stuff.
Right. So I'll ask you then. So when I first sort of approached you to be a co-founder, how was your mindset at the time? And then why was that appealing?
Okay. So this is a really interesting question because I was coming at it not from a founder position. I was working in ad agencies, and my background is all in running Facebook and Google ads, and very much so on the marketing side of things. And so on the marketing side of things, I wasn't really thinking about building a product per se. I think you were kind of the creator, and then I'm the marketer. So I think there's benefits in having that. But in terms of when you came to me and we discussed this, I was definitely looking for something more than just working at a company. I think there's definitely, pros and cons to just working in a job, but I definitely just didn't like working for someone at a job 9 to 5 with nothing really changing. Yes, you would make small progressions constantly in your career and you would grow, you would change companies and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, you didn't necessarily have anything that you had created or was yours. You're still just sitting there making other people money when you're working at an ad agency, and you're marketing other people's products. So I think the appeal there was, hey, I'm marketing all these other people's products. Why don't I have, a product myself that I can market, and then, have something that it continues on. So when you work at an agency, you have clients, they come and they go, and that's the end of it. Whereas when it's your product, you have it over a long period of time, you're continually growing it, and you're looking at the whole life cycle of that company, rather than being in an ad agency where you're just seeing one particular small section of that life cycle. You're seeing maybe the start, the beginning, the end. Depending on if the marketing goes well. So I think the main thing was I definitely wanted to have a product which I was marketing that I had, all of the full life cycle involvement. So that was one big thing. And two, I didn't think SaaS was going to be as hard as it ended up being. So a lot of the success that I had been in the e-commerce space. So running ads to e-commerce stores and having a very direct response, ROI focused, performance driven feedback loop. So you could see exactly what the ROI is for the money that you're spending, and that's scalable because I can see exactly what's happening, and there's less variables. When people go to buy a kind of direct to consumer product, there's nowhere near the decision making process that happens that goes into buying a B2B SaaS product. So I definitely thought that it was going to be easier than it was. And so I thought it was a good opportunity. And obviously we work together. So I think one of the biggest things that I really liked about the arrangement when we first came together was that we'd already worked together. We already knew each other a little bit. And also we had complementary skill sets. I would say those were the most important things for me when I was making that decision to become a co-founder.
Yeah. And then, okay, so, and then to go back to on my end, right? I think, being the technical person, I think there's a lot of people who kind of like wonder, how do you get like a technical co-founder, right? And like, obviously for you, like for me, I approached you for that. And you're like the non-technical co-founder, right? Which just means you're not doing the code. And the reason why I wanted to work with you was you actually had a skill set, right? Because I think the problem with a lot of these people who are trying to find technical co-founders is they don't come at it with like something that they bring to the table, right? Because having a skill set is super important. So for you, you've spent a lot of money in Google ads. You've done a lot of, just ads in general, and you know the marketing space really well. And so that's a big plus for someone who's a technical co-founder. And you have a track record essentially, right? Like for me, I'm not going to partner up with somebody who doesn't have a track record in something, right? Because otherwise, like if it's just like you're partnering up with someone for sweat equity, which I've done in the past, right? The problem is that relationship sours because the other person just ends up not being able to contribute much. And so it's just you need someone who has a skill set, or they need to be able to bring something to the table that's like a strong addition to the product. So that's what you need to think about. If you don't have that, then you need to get that. If you can't code, then you have to figure out the other skill sets that you can bring to the table. And that could be like, for example, connections. It could be money. It could be like sales skills, marketing, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So all of those are super valuable.
Yeah, I think the other thing is like, even though I went in with the skill set of Facebook and Google ads, there's been a lot of development in those other areas. So I think when you are looking at a person's skill sets, also like marketing is general enough that we've been able to pivot into, email marketing, affiliate marketing, running ads, organic marketing, all those different types of things. So when you look at the skill sets of your potential co-founder, think about like not just what they have now, but what they can also expand into. Because now at the moment, our main, source of customers isn't paid Facebook and Google ads. So you still need to also make sure that you're choosing someone who can adjust and adapt depending on what your startup requires. Because if you just hire someone to do one particular thing and that's the only thing they can do and the only thing they're willing to do, it might be harder if that one thing that they do doesn't necessarily work out correctly for being a good fit for your product. Because I thought that we would have definitely been scaling way more on Facebook and Google than we actually ended up doing. So we definitely did try it and definitely did a bunch of different things in that area. But if we just kept on trying to do those only two things, I don't think we would have been able to get to the point where we are, or we definitely would have been less profitable.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, I mean, we kind of talked about the complementary skill sets, whether you need a co-founder, how to find a co-founder. So I guess, okay, so let me ask you a question, okay? Mm-hmm. So if I didn't approach you, what would have been your, like, how would you have built your own business, or would you have just stayed in like the 9-to-5? Like, what would your process have been?
Yeah, so I think you can go two ways. You can either build a service or you can build a product. my skill sets are definitely coming from that agency world. So probably, marketing agency or whatever. And then in terms of the product, I definitely wouldn't have found a product as fast as I did joining up with you. So for example, I might have found a product, but I probably would have gone down the service route and building courses and that sort of stuff rather than actually building SaaS products. So I think that's where it kind of changed in the trajectory of where it was heading. Because I definitely don't think I would have stayed in the 9 to 5. I haven't had too many jobs really.
Right.
And, I was already, like when we started Vyper, it was already obvious that we were going to do freelance. So we were going to go from working full time to freelance to then working product full time. And so I think, going from in a marketing role, it's very easy to do freelance work, which then generally leads to, okay, I've got too much work. Let's hire people to do that, which then turns into an agency. So I think, that's an easier route. But looking at the agency model, there's a bunch of issues there as well. You have a constant cycle of trying to acquire clients and dealing with people. You've got to deal with way more staff. It's not as scalable. The profit margins are way smaller on agencies than they are products. So there's definitely pros and cons. I think it's easier to start an agency or do freelance and that sort of stuff than it is to build your own product. But I think in the long run, it's more valuable to have your own product than it is to have an agency or something like that.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I think, two different skill sets in a way, right? Because you have, for your agency, it's like, you have the marketing skill, which is a need, but then you also have to be good at like sales essentially. So if that's your thing, if you're like sales and marketing, then, agency would be a good choice. But then if you have like, if you're like more like me, which is like, you're more of a creator, then you want to be more on the product side. So it's really like what your interests are, I think. Too.
Yeah. It's also playing into what you're good at. So a lot of people will say, I was listening to a great podcast the other day that was talking about do what you're good at, not do what you love. Because I think a lot of people say do what you love and you'll get good at it. But a lot of the time what people love doing, there's not a huge demand for it. So I think start off by doing what you're good at. And then once you've made enough equity or you've got enough capital, then you can start doing what you love. And hopefully that turns into, a successful business as well. But I think, too many times do people listen to the advice of, do what you love. And that's great, but not as your first step in your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. Don't you think that like people who do what they're good at, like generally love that thing that they're good at though? In a way, because it's like hard to be good at. It's hard to be good at something that you don't love, right? Like, can you think of something that you're good at but you hate?
Washing, cleaning.
You're good at cleaning.
Exceptionally good at mopping floors.
Like, I think what I think is a good example of that though. It's like, so I think what that might illustrate too is like if you're good at something if you love something that isn't profitable, could be a good example. Like for example, like I really love tennis, or I love like basketball, but I'm not going to be in the NBA because I'm not good at it. Where I'm like good for like my like skill level, but I'm not good compared to LeBron James. So it's like, I'm good in my community, but like, you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like, I think that's kind of what that's kind of illustrating too. Like sometimes you love something, but you can't necessarily, be in a profitable niche with it. But I have seen like these guys who like really love tennis and then they actually make money like selling like tennis courses. So that's still doable. So I've been seeing stuff like that.
Recently. I think that's only recently showed up as a revenue stream though, because when you think about it, courses, like self-made courses online only really started developing when the internet got good enough, internet speeds, and camera footage, audio, all that sort of stuff. All of these technological things had to happen before that was an option. So back when maybe we were starting out when we were like 18 or something, the technology probably wasn't necessarily there to do that. Whereas now I think there's a huge opportunity for people of all ages to now create their own content that's of high enough quality to then sell as a course. Because can you imagine like 10 years ago trying to make a course with like your phone or a shitty camera that used to be around?
Oh yeah. Well,
uploading that and then creating it.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I know what you mean. Like, it's just the camera quality is like so much better now. I mean, 10 years I don't think is enough time, because 10 years ago, like, we still had like good cameras already, but it was mostly the people who had those cameras were like mostly like really serious photographers and stuff like that. Like, cause I had a good camera 10 years ago. But yeah, for the average consumer, no.
Yeah, but what I was saying is if you created that content footage, you still couldn't easily put that online and sell that as a course. Like,
there wasn't
10 years ago, a $50,000 website build.
Well, no. I don't think 10 years ago. I think maybe you're thinking 20 years. But like 10 years ago, there were already platforms like that. But they weren't as good. Like, Hyax is way better than all of them, like, by far. So back then it was like I remember, like, I think back then I did actually do a couple courses. I think I started doing courses in 2014 or so. So that was like 6 years ago. So not 10 years ago, but that was like 6 years ago. And then I had one, basically it wasn't a course. It was actually just an ebook. And that one did pretty decently. But like, and that was an ebook in the photography niche. So that was all right. No, it was a photography. It was like how to do better photography.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing. If you do like something, as you were saying, like if you do really like something, now you can monetize that better than you might, than you used to be able to.
Yeah, because back then, so this was 2014, like we sold it through like email lists and stuff. We did a little bit of like Google ads and Facebook ads, but like we never got it to a point where it was like really profitable. And granted, like I didn't have that like skill set that you do on those ads. So it was mostly like just break even or like a loss, I remember. But we had an email list. That was the main channel that we used to sell the ebook.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think a lot of people, like just talking to that a little bit, a lot of people I think overlook some of the old stuff that used to work. Like email still works extremely well. Like you don't have to go and run, like Facebook Messenger bots or Google ads or TikTok ads, Snapchat ads and all that sort of stuff. Like I think, some of the old school stuff actually still works really, really well. Like, we still rely very heavily on our email list as one of the main sources of converting leads into customers. So, I think more people need to not just focus on the new and shiny stuff. They also need to look at okay, well, this has been working, like email's been working forever. And it's still maybe it's less effective, but it's still working a lot better than some of these new platforms that are unproven.
Yeah, I think email is still the best way to get marketing going because it is the only platform that you control, basically. Like with Facebook and stuff, like it's getting harder and harder on all those platforms, and obviously Facebook's getting greedier. So even without like Instagram and, Facebook, like they're limiting your reach and stuff. So, and it's only going to get worse because Facebook is a very greedy company.
Yeah, it's because they got so many investors they need to please.
Yeah. Yeah. So all those channels, like if you don't own your channel, like you're going to lose traction. That's why, like, I think this is a good point for why you should create your own site instead of like relying on these platforms like Patreon. because you never know. Because even if you get like Patreon is technically should help you get some members, but it's getting harder and harder to do that. So, and then you don't own those members. Whereas if you built your own site like on Hyax, then you would be able to own your own members.
Well, yeah, you also see this issue with like, the influencers that got big on Vine, or people who had large followings on MySpace or Friendster. All of these platforms have built networks where people might have created a huge amount of following and attention, which was great. But then as soon as that platform didn't become relevant anymore, you lose all your authority and you lose your value. So I wonder if that's going to happen to things like Instagram, for example. There's so much money getting made right now from influencers on Instagram, but what happens when people shift away from Instagram and those influencers don't get onto, TikTok early enough, or they don't get onto, a bunch of them tried to get onto Periscope and that went nowhere. So, there is a big danger relying on another company or another platform for your success, which I think we also learned a few times with Vyper as well. Relying on other platforms or people can be an issue for your own product. So, we heavily rely on social media actually for Vyper to run smoothly and to be successful. Whereas I think what we learned and why we're pivoting, Hyax isn't going to rely on any other platform. So we're not going to have issues with being like, okay, Facebook doesn't want us to do that. That's ruined our best feature, for example.
I was going to say and that affects the smaller creators the most. Like if you're just a new creator, an indie creator, owning your own platform is so important because, and having your own website and stuff like that, because you collect all that data and you can, use that data. Like obviously if you're like a celebrity, it's like a totally different story. You can survive on any platform. If you're Beyonce, it doesn't matter if you're on TikTok or Instagram, right? Because you're always going to have that name recognition. But if you're a smaller creator, then you really need to own your own data even more so, because you don't have that name recognition and you can't just build an audience out of thin air. So it's just magnified when it comes to these smaller creators, how important it is to own your own data. And that's why email is so important too.
Yeah, well, the other thing that brings up is you can take your email list and put it in any provider you want, upload it to any ad network you want. It's not siloing you to only use one platform or one channel of communication. So that's another thing to take in mind when you're thinking about, usually you should pick 2 to 3 channels of communication with your audience, whether it is email marketing, whether it's social media, organic, ads, SMS messaging, direct sales, organic. Try and think of all the different channels that you get traffic and customers from, and then focus on 3, and then make sure that you diversify a little bit so that you don't rely on one too heavily, because if that one channel that you rely on for some reason gets shut down, are you still going to survive? Are you going to be able to pivot and rely on your other 2 channels and then replace that 3rd one at some point? Because I do see this a lot of the time when brands, this is coming from the e-commerce world as well, when brands are relying so heavily on one platform. For example, Facebook ads might be working for them and they're spending thousands of dollars a day on Facebook ads, but then their account gets shut down and they all of a sudden have nothing backing them up. They have no organic search, they have no email list, they have no SMS list or whatever. So think about when you are creating your product, your course, or your SaaS, what are 2 or 3 main channels of communication that you want to focus on to get started, and don't just too heavily rely on one, because relying on one platform, they have a lot of control over the success of your company or your business or product.
Yeah. And so that also emphasizes the fact that, when you do get all these different channels, you need to start funneling them into your email list right away, because that's an actionable step to help prevent your traffic from decaying, essentially. because we just had a friend who relied over heavily on SEO, right? And then his traffic dropped by 50% after an update. They found out like his strategy like I guess didn't work for some reason, and the update killed off all his SEO traffic. And then he had to essentially lay off like a good amount of people because of that.
Yeah, same thing happens with Amazon. Amazon is a very low friction way to start, but you see a lot of people going to Amazon, and then Amazon, shutting them down, removing their ranking, duplicating their product. So there's so many different scenarios where larger brands are trying to own the audience and just rent it to you. So it's really important to try and own your own audience.
Well, that brings up a good point, because that's like one of the dangers of using like Amazon and like these platforms like Patreon, right? Because they own your audience.
Yep.
Like you never want to be at the mercy of one of these guys. Like even at least if you're using Shopify, like you can still keep your customer data.
Yep.
Because you have it in your email list and stuff like that. So you always want to use platforms like Shopify or other more self-serve platforms versus like the ones where like Udemy, Patreon, Amazon, where they own your data.
Yeah, and I think there's there's definitely caveats to that where people say, okay, well, they have all the attention, they have all the traffic, and that's, a lot of the time that is true. They have a lot of exposure that they can give you. But I think what people need to think about is like, how do I use that as a loss leader? Or how do I, have some sort of point that's like the point of my spear that brings people in the door, and then you funnel it to the assets that you own. So, thinking about when you're putting stuff into Facebook Messenger, making some of the first sequences for them to submit their email address or for them to submit their phone number. Same with if you have, Patreon or Amazon or any of these guys, how can you kind of use maybe that as a kind of a loss leader for your company to kind of get them to discover you, and then you re-engage them through your own practices. I think it's another way that you can use those platforms still, but not give up everything.
Yeah. So basically just try to funnel them as much as you can. I know with Amazon though, they try to severely limit that.
Oh yeah, definitely.
A lot of these platforms, like they try to prevent you from getting the customer data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you'll see this on hiring sites as well. We do a lot of hiring remotely, and you see constantly these remote job sites trying to prevent you from getting the applicant's email or cutting them out of the process. So it happens across almost every industry. There's someone who owns all the attention, and they rent it out to people for a fee, essentially.
Yeah. So just protect yourself, basically, I think is the key to that, right? It's just like protect yourself, try to get as much of your own data as you can, and then don't rely on those sources, because you have to think of it as like you have to run your business as if they can cut that off at any moment.
Yep.
Right.
I know we went a little bit off tangent, off topic.
Yeah.
There. Hopefully that was still helpful for all you guys listening in and wondering when you're getting started, what platforms to go with, how to structure your email list or your website or your course or digital product. Really focus on owning that customer. Was there anything else you wanted to go over on this? I think we pretty much covered everything that we wanted to cover.
Yeah, I know. I think that's a good overview. I think if anyone's interested more in like how to start a digital product or something, they should definitely email us, because I think we have the expertise on that.
Yeah. So definitely shoot over an email, jack@Hyax, Hyax.com. Shoot over any questions if you're, getting started or you want some advice on a situation you're in. More than happy to help answer those. If there's a bunch of questions, we can also go into making episodes around those questions if it's, asked enough, because we definitely want to learn from you guys what you want to listen to, what you want to learn about. And, thanks for tuning in for this episode. We're going to be bringing some awesome new episodes about early startup marketing and mid-stage marketing for your company. so that you can learn not just how to create something, but also how to grow it and market it and actually monetize it. And then we'll also be getting some new guests on and that sort of stuff. So it's not just our personal stories you're learning from, you're also learning from other entrepreneurs and creators who have gone through the same process. You'll start to see some trends. You'll start to see things that work across multiple verticals, multiple products. So you can apply those to your own products and services to hopefully help you grow. So let us know what you think. Subscribe. Definitely leave us a review if you can. And hit us up with any questions that you might have or anything that you would like us to cover in future episodes. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
All right. See you guys later.
Bye.
If you like the show, remember to share it with friends and coworkers. You can also check us out and share past episodes at blitzgrowth.com. Hit subscribe and leave a review letting us know how this podcast has personally helped you and your business. If you have any topics you'd like us to cover, make sure to send us an email via blitzgrowth.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on our next episode.